Over the last couple of weeks, we've been bringing you stories of substandard conditions at Walter Reed Medical Center. Tonight, the story of Marine Jonathan Schultz. He comes from a long line of military veterans. It was his duty, he thought, to fight in Iraq. He came back with 2 Purple Hearts, but like many troops, Schultz also returned with post-traumatic stress disorder. He needed treatment, but instead a Minnesota VA hospital told him he'd have to wait. The question is, did that wait kill him? CNN's Randy Kay tonight, keeping him honest.
This is the story of Marine Jonathan Schultz, number 26 on a list no one wants to be on.
So you're telling me that Jonathan told this hospital twice now that he was feeling suicidal, and they told him
it was number 26. They didn't have room. It would take 2 weeks
before he could be admitted.
Right.
26th on a waiting list.
Right. And to check back in a few days to see what number he was on the list.
Did you think that Jonathan had a few days at that point to wait?
No. No.
Months of intense fighting in Iraq. That's all it took for this fun-loving teddy bear of a guy with a smile as wide as the Minnesota farm he grew up on to unravel. 25-year-old Schultz returned home in March 2005, a tortured soul.
I remember a broken man, somebody who had no expression on his face, who would cry very easily, who at night you'd hear him screaming, moaning, groaning.
Jonathan's stepmom says he was sleeping just 2 hours a night, drinking heavily, having panic attacks. There was guilt over the loss of 16 men from his squad, including his 2 best friends.
He was big, he was strong, he was brave, but his whole experience over there almost left him trembling like a little kid.
Jonathan's drinking and violence led the Marines to give him a general discharge. Jim Schultz says his son became withdrawn, edging dangerously close to ending his life. Jim says Jonathan talked openly about suicide. The family doctor had diagnosed Jonathan with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and prescribed Valium, Ambien, and Paxil. None of it seemed to quiet this Marine's mind. Desperate for help, Jonathan turned to the VA hospital in Minneapolis. He couldn't hold a job, and without medical insurance, the VA was the only place he could afford.
When he asked to be accepted into an inpatient program at the Minneapolis VA, what did that hospital tell him?
They told him he couldn't get into that program at that time. It was full.
And he had to wait how long for the next one?
6 months.
Jonathan was sinking fast. In January this year, the Schultzes tried another VA hospital in St. Cloud, Minnesota, about an hour outside Minneapolis. Jim and Marianne Schultz both insist they heard Jonathan tell the intake nurse he was feeling suicidal. They recall being told the social worker who screens PTSD patients was too busy to see their son that day, even though they say he'd been made aware of Jonathan's suicidal tendencies. Jonathan was sent home and told to call back the next day, and when he did, his stepmom was listening.
And Jonathan said, yes, I feel suicidal.
The next day, when he called the hospital, you heard him tell them a second time?
Yes, a second time. A second time. He eventually was told that right at that point, there would be about a 2-week wait. He, at this point, was number 26 on the list, and to check in periodically.
4 days later, with a picture of his daughter at his side, Jonathan wrapped an extension cord around his neck, tied it to a beam in the basement of this home he'd been renting from a friend, and hanged himself. Unanswered cries for help, silenced.
If our men are going to serve for our country and serve in a war or a conflict, when they come home, they should be taken care of. They were promised when they went in. They were promised when they signed on that piece of paper. And they come home and they have a problem. And what are they told? You're number 26.
In Jonathan's massive medical file, an alarming absence. The social worker Jonathan spoke to by phone did not record the Marine's suicidal thoughts.
How do you explain that in that 400-page medical file of his, there isn't a single note mentioning that he said he felt suicidal?
Very plain and simple. St. Cloud VA altered those records, or else the individual he talked to did not put it in there when John did mention that.
If so, why wasn't he admitted immediately? The U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs is investigating and would not comment.
When a vet cries out that he's suicidal, even if they'd have to set a bed up in a kitchen, you don't turn them away. You don't put them on a waiting list.
Keeping them honest, we've learned the St. Cloud VA Hospital has just 12 beds for PTSD patients. The Schulzes say those beds were full. We've also confirmed the number of beds has remained unchanged for a decade, even though the U.S. has spent the last 5 years fighting wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The Department of Veterans Affairs tells us it expects 1 in 5 returning veterans to need treatment for PTSD. While the Schulzes struggle to heal, they find themselves at the center of a debate over the seemingly ill-prepared and overwhelmed VA system. Jonathan, in death, has breathed new life into the issue.
Jonathan didn't come home to die.
Nor did he come off the battlefield expecting he'd have to fight to get medical help at home. Randy Kay, CNN, Stewart, Minnesota.